What's up, it's King Steph, and the recent chapters in the Jujutsu Kaisen manga had me thinking of the domain expansions we've seen in the series, and simply which domains do I prefer, the lethal domains or the non-lethal domains. Which one do I like the most, and why the domain expansion is a special thing in JJK anyways. And while I'm at it, leave a comment down below of if you were a Jujutsu sorcerer, if you had a choice of a lethal domain or a non-lethal domain, let me know why and which one you pick. Now for me, it's kind of hard to pick because it's really drawbacks to both, but as I've reread the Higuruma versus Yuji fight, and of course, Kachima and Hikari, that's going on right now, I think the non-lethal domains honestly set up fights that have more layers to it, thematically, and even just the execution of the fight in general. I think a lethal domain is a lot more of a special moment and really gratifying in the story and for the readers because it's a risk to even use one of these, but it really symbolizes how strong that character is and how well you can control your curse energy to a certain level that is kind of looked at as a pinnacle of Jujutsu sorcery. First off, let's go over these lethal domains. They have a sure hit lethal technique in the domain. They're ultimate trump card. Once they're used, it's practically over. But they have drawbacks and take away a huge portion of the curse energy, and most of the sorcerers can only use it in one day, with the exception of obviously Gojo, and your domain can be overlapped if your opponent has a greater control of their domain expansion. And after using domain expansion though, your curse technique, it won't be accurate or fast compared to how it was before the domain. Now the best domains in the series in my opinion of the lethal domains are Gojo, Sukuna, and Mahito. These are, once they're used, it's practically over. Even though Mahito's was broken through, we all know if Mahito actually uses this domain effectively, he's winning very quickly. Now I think potential wise, open domains is kind of what I'll call them for now, like Sukuna's and to an extent Megumi's, even though his isn't complete. I honestly feel like those domains are a lot more effective just because Sukuna gets rid of his barrier, so he makes a vow of just increasing the meter that he could use cleave and dismantle, which in my opinion, that is a lot more devastating than it would be if it was actually enclosed, because now he can basically use this domain on multiple people. The only bad thing really being is that he's giving his opponent an escape route, which even then, it's an escape route of 200 meters. That's a lot of freaking running if you're trying to get past him, and not to mention his techniques are short hits, so they're not gonna miss if you try to dodge them. These non-lethal domains, they have a short hit rule effect. Basically, whenever they open the domain, you're already gonna be filled with information on how their domain is gonna work, like the probabilities of it. Like, it's a lot going on with it, especially when they did Hikari's. That was a lot of information to take in within basically seconds. They also have these binding vows that give you the upper hand. Higuruma has no violence between both fighters as the trial unfolds, which that's pretty significant considering basically you're kind of at his will as this whole trial is going on. It's actually pretty cool in my opinion and very effective. Now, one thing compared to the lethal domains, the non-lethal domains can be used multiple times throughout the day. Typically, I'm gonna guess around they're used maybe 2 to 3 times at most. But the benefits from these domain expansion techniques can be very, very tremendous, especially if they work. Like, for example, Higuruma can erase your curse energy or curse technique for a period of time with confiscation. He also has death penalty, which gives him an executioner's sword that auto kills the target if stabbed by him. Then Hikari has jackpots, which he receives infinite curse energy, and a reverse curse technique that automatically applies to him when he's taking damage. Basically, he becomes immortal for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. That's incredible. But these also do have some drawbacks of their own. There's no guaranteed lethal attacks, and the conditions need to be met in order to receive these benefits and rewards from the domain that were stated before. And sometimes the domain can actually work against you by receiving essentially nothing from it. Like, for example, if Hikari never hits a jackpot, he's basically having his domain open for no reason. Now let's get into which one I prefer. Let's get into really what that is. Now I'm putting myself into the shoes of a Jujutsu sorcerer. Let's say I'm in Jujutsu Kaisen's world and I'm creating my own domain. Which one would I like? Now, I did say I do like the non-lethal one just a little bit more in terms of like a story. But if I'm a sorcerer, it's very difficult because honestly, you have to go with a lethal domain because the one thing we do know about non-lethal sorcerers is they're pretty much, their whole toolkit is nice. They can handle themselves in terms of their curse energy. They can do well in hand-to-hand combat. They're very well versed. That way, if their domain doesn't work, they can at least take care of, protect themselves in case something happens. So they're not really scrubs without their domain. Their domains is basically how they can really go off. But I personally think that a lot of the top sorcerers, if you're going to be listed as, which this is a high bar, but if you're going to be listed as like a Gojo or a Yuta, even though we haven't seen Yuta's domain, but it has been teased, I feel like you kind of need a lethal domain to actually be at the top of the food chain. Just because the non-lethal ones are they're a little almost too conditional. So it's kind of hard to pick, although when they do get them to work, they're pretty much almost impossible. I don't want to say impossible, but they're going to be very, very, very difficult to beat. So it's kind of just a situation of, if I have a non-lethal domain, I could potentially be a special grade and up type sorcerer after my domain works. But without it, I'm kind of just a first grade in reality. That's essentially what it is. Now, the lethal domains, I kind of just have to go with those because it's honestly very unlikely that you're going to run into somebody who has a stronger domain than you, because having a domain expansion in general is just very rare. Now, I know we see a lot of them in the culling games, and that's because the culling games is pretty much centered around strong sorcerers. That's essentially what it is for the most part. So that's why we're seeing so many of them. But in terms of just where you're at, I honestly don't feel like it's that many stronger domains. Like, for example, Gojo's domain is probably never going to be overlapped. The only one that could possibly do it is Sukuna, and that's another guy who's a once in a lifetime type being. So that's personally how I feel about it. I feel like lethal domains are the way to go, and I kind of want to see if Gege is ever going to create a non-lethal domain that actually kind of is very offensive instead of a lot more set up to be offensive. Now, Tengen does say to Yuji that the sorcerers that have the non-lethal ones, those are kind of like the olden days type domains, which is kind of odd to me how some modern sorcerers actually have that. But those domains are typically used a lot in the older sorcerer days. Like, almost everyone had one back then. Now it's very rare, which I always find that pretty interesting, how typically over time something becomes, normalized. But in Jujutsu Kaisen, something like a domain expansion becomes rare over time, which I think that's pretty different, because even not just anime and manga, after when something is explained as a special technique, normally it's something that over time you're going to see it a lot more. For example, like the Bankai in Bleach. But in this scenario, we're really only seeing so many of them right now just because of where we're at. I just think it's pretty cool how Gege is still keeping the specialness of a domain and adding more to it. Now, I would not be surprised if Gege kind of experiments and adding a third domain, and that domain kind of just being like the Sukuna open one. I would not be surprised if he kind of gives that a different name to it, because those do feel a lot more special than the closed barriers. But hey, that's kind of how I'm feeling about these domains right now, and I love the whole thing. I love the Ryoki Tenkai that's said in Japanese. I just think they're very, very well done and used almost perfectly. And one last thing before I end the video, I also want to see a non-lethal domain that's used but somebody actually beats them while they're in the opposing person's domain. I want to see that happen, and I also want to see, can in a non-lethal domain actually be overlapped by a strong enough lethal domain? Or unless that's just not a thing, then that's obviously not going to happen due to the binding vows of the non-lethal domain and everything. So I wonder if the Gege is going to kind of toy with that aspect of actually beating someone while they're in their own domain, because we haven't really seen that. The closest we got was the Dagon situation with Megami, and that kind of really wasn't Megami beating him with the domain. It was more so him just making an escape route. So I wonder if we're ever going to see that in the series. What I had to say about these domains and my thoughts on both of them, which one I prefer, and so on and so forth. So like I said in the comment section down below, let me know which one you prefer, and also leave a like and subscribe, as we always got JJK content as well as other newer manga and anime content as well on this channel. So I'll holler at y'all on the next one. Peace.